Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome everybody to Daf Yomi Week in Review. I am Rachel Scheinerman. I edit the website My Jewish Learning and have the pleasure of hosting this class for a rotating cast of delightful teachers who always have the daunting task of spending half an hour diving into what happened in the Talmud this week, because it goes fast and furious, and sometimes it's like, what happened? And this week we are delighted to be joined by Rabbi Elliot Goldberg. So Rabbi Goldberg, I think we're all assembled. Why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Okay. Excuse me. Sorry. Uh, Good morning or whatever time of day it is to you, wherever you are. I see we have people here from all over. This week we've spent most of our time dealing with questions related to when you sell something, what's included in the sale. So we're not talking about like individual items or transactions in the grocery store or a clothing shop. But if you're selling a piece of property, if you're selling a house, if you're selling like a significant transaction of property, what's included with the sale and what's not included. And we've had lists in the Mishnah of things that are automatically included in certain sales and lists of things that are not included unless they're specified in the agreement. And I have to say, in the days or weeks, or it might even be a month of sugyot like this, I'm finding myself feeling like, really, do we really need all these lists? There's all this information about all these sales, and to be honest, these pages have dragged a little bit for me, and that was until we hit upon a page this week that made it all come home for me. And I guess I'll start with the end with the story that the Gemara reminded me of that made me think of why this is important. And then we'll look at a couple of texts and see if there are questions. So, um, a number of years ago, my family lived in West Hartford, Connecticut, and we moved um, to Newton outside of Boston. And when we were moving, the housing market wasn't in such a fast moving pace. So we rented our house for a few years in Hartford, which we didn't live in. And then 2 or 3 years after we had moved, we sold our house in Hartford. So happy story. All that went well. But here was the one way that it didn't. About 2 weeks after the family who bought our house in Hartford moved into the house, I got a call, and the people said, "Hey, where's the microwave?" And I said, "Well, what microwave? What do you mean?" And they sent me a picture from the picture we had posted of the house, which had the pictures you put online on the real estate website. And in the picture of the kitchen, there, sure enough, on the countertop is our microwave. And they said this was in the picture and it's not in the kitchen. And I had, I guess, what now I realize was a Talmudic moment, which was like, oh, it was a countertop microwave. In my head, I was like, if it had been, I'll say it the Talmud way, if it had been a built-in microwave that was attached to the cabinetry and a fixed part of the kitchen, it seemed to me that that would be included in the sale automatically. But if it's a microwave that's sitting on the counter and not attached to anything, um, it seems to me that that's maybe a movable item, and that should be something that comes into my house. It comes to my new house with me, um, and as it, and so I was a little surprised. I said, "Oh, I didn't think the microwave was included in the." But before I wrote back to the person, I checked the paperwork and actually noticed that when we had filled out all the things, right, your real estate agent gives you a very Mishnah-like checklist. Here are all the things included in this that could be included in the sale. Check what you're including. Check what you're not including. We had checked off that our microwave is included in the sale, and so we owe them a microwave. And since it was only an hour away, we actually had that microwave that was in the picture. I put it in the car. I got in the car in. So two things happened while I was telling the story. I saw two comments come into the chat. More people were saying hi as well. One person said, "Didn't we talk about this last week?" And I feel like we could have talked about this. I wasn't here with you guys in this session last week. We might have talked about this last week because it feels to me that's the what I've been feeling the last couple weeks. Haven't we talked about this? Haven't this we settled this? And then someone else said, well, why not just send them $75, right? So I could have settled with the people who bought our house and just said, well, what's a microwave cost? I'll send you a check. But in our new house, we had a built-in microwave. We didn't need the loose microwave. I don't know if that's what it's called, countertop microwave. So we drove it over. I decided to spend the time in the car instead of sending a check. Anyways, that was solved. But it occurred to me. So this is what the story that occurred to me that said, maybe these pages of the Mishnah are actually more relevant than I was feeling as I read them, because here I have an actual sale of a piece of property and I have an instance of um, what's included in the sale or not. And it actually matters because here I thought I still own my countertop microwave. My buyer thought that they owned it. So that's a little introduction to the text we're going to look at. I'm putting a link to the slides in the chat if you want to follow along on your own. I'm going to bring up the text though on the screen, so you don't have to open that document now if you don't want to. And we're going to look at we're going to look at today 3 texts. I'm always so amazed how fast the internet works. Like 8 of you are already in the slides that I just posted seconds ago. We're going to look at some texts that are, maybe it was a clear-cut case of the microwave since I checked the box saying it was included in the sale of the house. But what I want to look at today are some of the 3 cases that come in a row in the Talmud, connected actually to the sale of the house, where the rabbis are asking, does this thing come with the house or not? And it happens, what these cases have in common is we end them all saying we're not sure. These are in some ways, I think the cases that the Talmud is looking for, meaning when the Talmud often says when a case it presents is so obvious that maybe it didn't need to share it. If it's too obvious, the Talmud doesn't need to talk about it. And if it's complex, it needs to reason it out. But sometimes um, with all the logical reasoning and all the tools that the rabbis have, there are some things that they say this could go either way. We're not sure, and they uphold the question for all of time. And those are the cases we're going to look at today. So, case number 1. I would say maybe these are the microwave equivalents of the Talmudic dispute about the story I just told. So Rabbi Elazar asks, with regard to wooden door frames, what is the halacha? I found this to be an interesting question because when I think about my house, if I'm selling a house, and I, I believe I'm selling the door frames along with the house. The question is, why is he asking this question about the door frames? And the Gemara fleshes out the question a little bit. It says, don't raise this dilemma in a case where the frames are attached to the house with clay, as they are certainly attached to the house and sewed along with it. When you can raise this dilemma is when they're connected only with small wooden pegs. So here's what the Gemara says, right? Certain door frames, wooden door frames that go within the doorway, sometimes are clearly part of the house because they're attached. And here they say attached with clay. Right? You think back to ancient times, the houses in the areas where the Talmudic rabbis lived were most likely crafted with stone, but built into right. You can't really have. It's possible to make a stone door. There are stone door frames. You could have a stone door, but more likely than not, a little bit of wood was used for the door if the door was actually closed. And to attach that door, there could have been a door frame. Or perhaps the wood door frame is decorative. It's ornamental. It's like the pictures we put on the wall, or things we hang over our windows that may or may not be included in the sale of the house. And so the rabbis say, if the door is if the door frame is attached to the house with clay, that shows that the clay attaches it to the house. That makes it part of the construction. Of course, you sell it, but what happens if somehow you've pegged the door frame into the doorway with wooden pegs and attached it? Is that considered part of the house, or is that decorative ornamental and you get to keep it? And what's the ruling in that case? The Gemara says this dilemma stands unresolved before for all time. When I saw this case, I had grand visions of finding you some terrific pictures of Talmudic houses. We have some archaeology of those houses to show you, like actual photos of these actual things. But what I didn't think about when I had these visions, but realized as I searched the internet for this, mostly of the houses of this era, what's left of them are the stones and not the wood. Where we do have, archaeological digs that have Talmudic houses. And many, actually, on the Golan Heights is a great place to see. There's actually a museum. There's a Talmudic village on the Golan near the city of Katzrin. If you visit Israel and you have a chance to go to the Golan, I would suggest that you go there. They've taken all these everyday things that we have in the Talmud, wine presses and grape presses and olive presses and pots and ovens and construction, and brought it to life. You can actually walk through it and see it. But of course, they don't have wooden door frames in any of the houses that are there because those did not survive the test of time because the wood went away. So you have to use your imagination here to think of what this is. But when the door frame is attached to the house, it's clearly part of the house. If it's something that's somehow hung with these pegs, we're not sure. It might be that when you sell the house, it's part of the house that goes with it. It might be when you sell the house, it's not part of the house. And the Talmud says, we don't know. This is one of the cases that's unresolved. That's case number one. Case number two, Rabbi Zera comes and raises a similar dilemma with regard to window frames. What's the halacha? So do we say that they serve merely as an ornament? Or perhaps since they're attached to the window, they are attached? This dilemma also stands unresolved. So this second case that Rabbi Zera brings, that says, well, if you put a frame inside the window, right, and mostly the windows were just holes, right, holes in the wall. They weren't. Don't think about the modern windows that we have today that are energy efficient. These were probably not energy efficient windows. They're meant to be kept open for a breeze to maybe cool the house in the hot days. But people could put frames in the window, and the question is, are those decorations? Or are they part of the house? Here too, the Talmud isn't sure and doesn't draw a clear conclusion one way or the other. Third case brought by Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Yirmiyah, who I know we've talked about in this space, and people have written about Rabbi Yirmiyah on our daily blog. Rabbi Yirmiyah is known for taking a series of questions that the Gemara asks or cases and pushing it to the next level. And when things, he tries to really test the cases and get to the most extreme possible test case. And so we move from door frames and door windows to something different. Rabbi Yirmiyah raised a dilemma with regard to the stands for the legs of a bed. What is the halacha? So first question is, like, what are the stands for the legs of a bed? These actually we could have today in its own way, right? You have a bed with a bed frame. It's got 4 posts on each side that's holding the bottom of the bed, the bedboard or the mattress off the floor. Where we keep our mattresses a little off the floor to protect them from the dust and dirt, or if in the Talmudic houses, maybe the water or the moisture coming in from the floor, because the floors weren't often tiled floors, they were just actually earth. So lifting the bed up gave it some protection. But you could put some to protect either the legs of the bed themselves or to keep the bed from moving. You could put a stand in which the legs go. I don't know if you have this in your house. We have some pieces in our dining room table where we have these little rubber trays almost that go under the legs of the table or under the legs of our some of our freestanding pieces in our dining room, and they help keep the furniture in its place. Or if you move it, they help us keep from scratching the wood floor. You can get them for a very reasonable price at Home Depot or some other store by you. And it seems that in the Talmudic time they had it as well. They might have stands that go under the legs of the bed to hold it in place or protect it from the moisture, protect the bed. The question is, are those part of the house or are they part of the bed and the furniture? The Gemara here tries to, again, sort of narrow this case, define it better. It says, don't raise this dilemma whenever the stands move along with the bed, because they move along with it and are therefore not considered part of the house. But if these stands are even though right, the legs of the bed are in them, they're not attached to the bed, but the bed rests in them. But if you were to move the bed, if the stands move too, clearly they're part of the bed and not part of the house. But when can you ask this? You can ask this question where these stands for the legs of the bed, where they do not move along with the bed. So if the stands are affixed to the floor or they're built into the house, if they're somehow attached, so if you were to move the bed, you'd have to lift it out of these stands and put the bed down somewhere else. But the stands are sort of in a fixed place. You could ask that question. Because they're affixed to the house, are they part of the house? And you have to leave them there so the new owners who buy your house can come and put their bed in these stands. Or while they're attached to the house, are they also there to serve the bed? And they're part of the bed. They're just affixed to the house because we want them to be, tied into the floor so that they don't move and they help stabilize the bed and keep it in place. In this case, also, the dilemma stands unresolved. We're not sure which way to go about these three items. So those are these three similar related texts about the sale of a house, each of which don't have a clear conclusion. So I'm going to just close off the slides and come back to you. So I can see some of your faces on my opening screen. Here, a few things before we go to your question. One is we have, again, we've seen this before and talked about it before, but I think when it comes up, it's important to state. The rabbis work hard to differentiate between cases. Right here, the issue is, right, who gets this piece of property? The seller, do they keep it? Or the owner, the seller, do they keep it? Or the buyer, do they acquire it through the transaction? Right, we know whether we're talking about cisterns or wine presses or dovecotes, right, or sheds in the back of the property where you're selling a house, or even features of the house. These questions are important, just like the buyer of my house wanted the microwave that they thought was theirs. And I thought it was ours, and it turned out that it was theirs, so I had to deliver it to them. The rabbis spend all these pages trying to decipher, what the rule is. But we do have cases where there isn't a determining factor, meaning in each of these cases, I think the rabbis are saying you can make a case that this thing belongs to the original owner of the house and they get to take it with them. And you also can make a case that it goes to the buyer of the house. Fortunately, I think for, buyers and sellers of houses in the rabbinic era, most of the cases they solve, they have an opinion one way or another, and that provides clarity, right? In these cases where there's not clarity, it could be left for the buyer and seller to work out for themselves, and that could lead to interpersonal conflict. If someone really wants the window, oh, I thought that window frame was coming with the house. I bought the house because I love the window frames. And the seller said, no, those are my decorative window frames that I bring with me to all my houses. You could end up with a fight, civil strife. And the rules, when they're clear, when there is a law, when there is a rule that gives both the buyer, the seller, and potentially a judge is brought into the case clarity, we know what the rule is, and we don't have to work it out after the fact because these rules are there. And if there's a conflict, you can look it up and see what's there. Which is actually how I resolved the microwave case. I actually looked at the documents of the sale, in which we said we're selling the microwave. Since it was in the documents, that made it. So we have these cases that are more the exception and the rule, and that might be why whoever it was earlier who said, wait, weren't we talking about this still last week? There are so many items that, in purchases of land and property that could be included or not included with the sale. And we see in these chapters of Bava Batra, the rabbis are really trying to be as clear as possible and spell it all out and make sure we know each and everything, which category it goes in. buyer or seller. And there are only these few cases where we're really not sure and it could go either way and we leave it that way. Most of them are settled one way or the other. And sometimes it's a little painstaking to keep reading through because the lists and the deliberations are similar. But ultimately, if you were the buyer, if you were the seller, if it's your dovecote or window ornament, the clarity is good one way or the other. It's good for everybody ultimately moving forward. Um, so that's the second point with that. The third thing I just want to remind everybody about all of this is what the Mishnah is outlining in most of the cases, and in these as well, is the principle that this is what happens if you don't specify. It doesn't repeat it as often, but underlying this whole conversation, Gemara, is the notion that if you do have um, window ornaments that you definitely want to keep or you definitely want to include in the sale, the best way to make sure there's clarity is to bring it up. Because you can write into a purchase agreement, um, in the rabbinic rules, things that are different from what the Mishnah says. Because if you say, I'm selling you this property, um, but I'm keeping the wine press. So I'm selling you the property, but I'm not keeping the wine press. Or I'm selling you this property, whatever you, the buyer and seller, want to work out. If you agree to buy and sell, um, you can do that by stating it in advance and put into documents, which is actually now, I think, in my experience buying and selling houses these days, everything gets checked out by the real estate agent and the lawyers to most of the time. It's worked out in advance and it's in the papers so that you don't have to take something to court to get it settled because you agree in advance and you stipulate everything. And by doing so, you avoid having to go to the default, which sometimes gets messy and what the Gemara has been talking about these times. So that's what I brought for today to see. I see a couple questions have come up about you can Google this. There's a Talmudic village in the city of Katzrin, Katzrin, on the Golan Heights in Israel. It's sort of a Talmudic museum slash archaeology museum. If you've been studying Daf Yomi and if you're using a source that has pictures, you sometimes see images that depict the things we read about. But there's something that's sometimes interesting and illuminating, especially if you're along the ride for the 7-year Daf Yomi journey, where we read a lot about of common everyday items that look different from the ones we use in our everyday life. If you find yourself in Israel and you find yourself up north and you can make it up to the Golan, I think it's a great museum for everybody. But if you're a student of Daf Yomi, it's a really, really good museum for you because it's a way to add to your knowledge that you've been working on and acquiring as we go. All right, I'm going to pause here and see if there are other questions from the crowd. You can raise your hand and we'll give you a chance to ask or comments as well. I don't know, Rachel, if you saw, sorry, Rachel, if you saw something in the chat that is worth calling out. I caught a few chats today, but not all of them.
Well, Robert Starr makes this point, which I think is always an interesting one to come back to as we move through this Daf Yomi learning together, which is he says this reads like a lawyer training manual or more like a constitution. And that gets to a question that I always find endlessly fascinating, which is just what is the Talmud, right? Like, why would you write a text like this? What is its purpose? What is it for? And this is something that scholars continue to debate. Is it a training manual? Probably not for lawyers so much as judges, but right, like that's one it does read like something that is for experts, not for lay people. And it doesn't read like a code. It does read like a training manual. But the Constitution idea also is an interesting one, that it's sort of a set of base laws, though I would say that more the Hebrew scriptures are the Constitution, and this is I don't know, the Hadith literature to borrow from another tradition. Rob, I see you have your hand up, so let me see. Maybe I've totally misrepresented him. Let's let him talk for himself.
No, I agree. But I was going to push it a little bit more. I mean, we're in the middle of Deuteronomy, which, wait, sorry, can you hear me? I'm not sure if I can hear.
Yes.
Yeah,
We can hear you.
we're in the middle of Deuteronomy, which some people think is sort of the revised version of how we're going to get along together as a society as we enter the land. So this has that same feeling of that they're kind of working it out. So sometimes they bring in Torah verses, sometimes they make it up out of whole cloth.
Yeah. I think that's a nice layer for that. I do think, like Rachel said, this is a professional document, meaning for people who are meant to use it, as opposed to, I don't think, especially these sections that we're reading these weeks, were ones that were meant to be read the way we're reading them. Instead, they were there for to judges to be able to look up cases, right? It's case law about if this happens, here's what you do. Um, it does echo Deuteronomy, which lists a whole bunch of rules, right, for how things are going to look at the land. I think it's both working out the details so there's as clear as possible. If this happens, here's what it is. If you're buying and selling land, here's how it works to make it clear for everybody. And I think there's also a piece of it that's a way to put into writing, to get civil law, so that in the sense that actually, so we can be civil, right? How do we be civil with each other? We agree to the rules of the game, and these are some of them. And that helps by making this clear. It theory reduces conflict. Although the cases that there are sometimes stories about, or cases that the rabbis talk about longer, are the ones where it's not clear what the right answer is, and you can go either way, where there's a difference of opinion because, like, the shed in your backyard could automatically be sold with your property or not. And we could do it either way, and maybe there's a case to be made either way. And sometimes it gets more interesting when there is some, but there is a working out of what are the terms of our social contract and how that's going to work, and what's the way to do that so that when I sell you my house, we've all agreed to what that means, so that it goes smoothly, which certainly is what the Torah hopes, is that when we build our society together, it will go smoothly between us. And also what the rabbis are trying to work out, how do we, right? It's both a manual, like, for what the judges could do when there is a conflict, but it's also about how do we set out these rules so we could teach them to people, so we could keep them from having to go to court, because we know how this operates on its own.
I popped in the chat an article that we actually solicited at My Jewish Learning in the lead up to this Daf Yomi cycle from Rabbi B'nai Lepe. And she has like a particularly strong argument about what the Talmud is and what the Talmud isn't. And I think if you haven't seen this article or haven't in a while, this is a fun one maybe at this moment to check out, and see if you agree with her. See if you agree. I think also, Rabbi Goldberg, you wrote a piece for us it ran pretty recently, in which you really highlighted the differences between Mishnah and Gemara, right? So the Talmud, of course, is composite. You have the Mishnah and the Gemara, and the Mishnah by itself seems to have one agenda and the Gemara another. And then the interesting thing to me about that is you could say the Mishnah is more of a code, more of a series of laws, and the Gemara is more of an exploration. But if you put them under a microscope, that distinction then quickly breaks down a little bit, and you see the Mishnah fighting with itself and having more of a discussion and more of a and more having and in many cases feeling more like a didactic text than a code. And likewise, the Gemara sometimes comes out with very strong generalized statements about law, as much as it sometimes, like we saw today, says, well, we're trying to figure it out and we don't necessarily know yet, and we'll just keep figuring it out. So one of the reasons these texts seem to just be interesting. And then of course, like, we have all the post Talmudic codes that similarly toggle between discussion and generalized laws or specific laws. So let's see, we are at the hour, so I think we should probably leave it there. Thank you, Rabbi Goldberg, for bringing us these texts in what might not have been the most scintillating week. of the Talmud, though we at My Jewish Learning will be never caught admitting that any page of the Talmud does not have interesting things on it. So, and thank you to all of you for the thoughtful and insightful discussions and questions. Lovely to see you this week, and we will be in your inbox tomorrow morning and in this space in just about 1 week. And yes, Emily, and I saw some other people say this too, I would love to do an MJL field trip to the museum in Kasserine. I have not actually seen it myself. And then I think we should tag on, as long as we're heading north in the country, we should go to oh, it's gone out of my head. Where are all the graves of Rabbi Judah Hanassi and all those other rabbis?
Beit, oh, now it's lost.
Right, it went out of my head too.
Beit something, right?
Tzipori,
Tzipori is one of, right, there's a,
he's right next door to it. Yep.
yes,
There's a
Tzipori
lot
is
of rabbinic activity up in the Galilee. So
yes.
anyway, we have time to come up with the full itinerary. We'll discuss more soon
We could
because it's
do
an
a Talmud
ongoing
trip
discussion.
to Israel. It would be fascinating. There's a lot of good stuff.
Yes, lots of good stuff, archaeological stuff, which is
Right.
exciting if you've spent a long time only in text to see some actual physical things.
I do have to say, on the scintillating, when I was getting ready for today, because of the writing I do, I'm a few weeks ahead of Daf Yomi, actually. But I remembered something around that I thought was this week. If you're stuck in this, what you buy and sell and what's included, like, get ready for tomorrow. Tomorrow's a whole different page. I was all excited to teach it today, but then I remembered it's tomorrow. But there's like, it's new tomorrow. It's a new track, all kinds of great stories. If you're ready for a change, boy, oh boy, read tomorrow.
Yeah. And thank you, Rob. Beit Sharim is what I was looking for.
Oh, Beit Sharim. See, I knew there was a Beit something. There
Came
we
to the
go.
rescue in the chat. Okay. All right. Well, we are at time. Lovely to see you all, and we will see you next week. Take care, everyone, and thank you.